for
Ken,
that. But asking someone to type a permit is not a management function,
You're missing my point.
I guess.
You're taking the building clerical and you're putting it under the water sewer,
No, the engineering services.
engineering services director.
Right.
Okay, so that person assigns the work, tells them what to do.
In your world, it does. That's not how I visualize it.
Well, that's what the job description is.
No,
Ken.
it doesn't.
This is what I'm talking about. You're taking the clerical from the building department and
Management
you're putting
of
it
clerical.
under the engineering services director.
Management.
And it's written in the contract that way. And you put a value on that of $20,000.
I have
And what
done
I'm
no such
saying
thing.
is, at the end of the day, if I'm the building inspection director, and I find myself every day assigning tasks and doing that management of that clerical, because that's the natural flow of the work, I am going to at some point grieve that I am really not the building inspection director, but I am actually the building official and the code enforcement officer, which jobs duties do include overseeing the clerical and assigning work and duties to those people.
Well, then we're in trouble because we got a part-time guy. We have 2 part-time employees that don't write their own inspections, but give that work to our clerical people. When they go out in the field, they come back, they give their notes to the clerical people. So now, we're gonna have to raise that person's salary too. From part-time, we'll have to make them full-time. And it sounds like we're gonna have to give them all the benefits that come with the GELC contract, because they give work to the clerical people too. We got a big problem under your scenario.
You don't, obviously, Ken, let's be real here. You know exactly what I'm talking
No, I don't. I'm completely baffled by what you're
How can
saying, and
you be
even though I
baffled?
explained to you
Are-
how
are-
I see
are
it
you-
different
are
than
you-
you, it's clear we don't
Are
see
you,
it.
are you saying
Do you
to me-
think you're gonna convince me? Do you think you're gonna convince me?
I think you need to understand
Do you
it.
think you're gonna convince
I think
me?
you need to understand it, Ken,
Okay.
which you don't.
So- And,
you
and
think-
not only do I not
you
understand
keep
it,
saying-
it doesn't appear that I'm gonna understand it if you say it over and
You
over.
keep saying that the building inspection director
Right.
is going to be assigning duties to that clerical when that duty is not part of that job description now.
And I disagree with that.
Well, here's the, show me here, show me in the contract, right here, right now, and show the board, where it says, under that job description,
Yep, it's the last 2 pages, last 3 pages.
that he is in charge to assign duties to,
It doesn't say that.
it
It doesn't say that because the building inspection director will not be assigning duties to the clerical. But that doesn't mean that if Dave says to the building official, hey, type any documents that person needs, they're gonna do it. That's the assignment of the duties. But the manager of a department can assign responsibilities. Hey, I'd like you to watch the counter today because Mrs. Smith isn't here. You need to keep an eye on the counter. Or, hey, I know normally Mrs. Jones sits in on the planning commission meeting. She's on vacation this week. Will you sit in on the planning commission?
But that's not his
But that
job.
doesn't mean that they say, well, I won't talk to anyone at the planning commission because I only take direct orders from my supervisor. That is the nature of assigning a
but
task.
that's
I
not
don't
his
think I can.
job. That's what I keep saying, Ken.
It's the engineering services
Correct,
director's
it's
job.
his job, not the building.
Right. Yeah.
That's my point.
I understand. As I said, I doubt you're going to convince me, and I'm probably not going to convince you.
Mr. Supervisor,
Yeah.
could I help to clarify something
Sure.
for the residents,
Sure.
not for this board? Because
Sure.
I think most of us understand.
Right.
The way I see this, we're looking at promoting Mr. Axtell to the position of Engineering Services Director. He would be the director overseeing the building official and any body that's within water and sewer and building.
Correct.
Correct.
So he would be overseeing everyone.
Bingo.
The building official would be his manager, overseeing a portion of those people.
Correct.
And it seems to me like the water and sewer department and the building department probably work together from time to time on
Frequently,
tasks.
yep.
And I don't think that it would be an issue if Mr. Axtell or if the building official tasked a clerical person to take care of something for either department, because we are paying them to do something for us.
Correct.
We're not asking them to shovel snow, we're asking them to take care of processing paperwork
Right.
for either water and sewer or building.
And it's in their
I
job
don't see an
description.
issue with any of this.
And it's a very similar function to the way it exists in the water and sewer department right
Right.
now. We have a water and sewer foreman, well, an acting foreman right now, that serves as a field supervisor. But on occasion, he comes in and says, hey, clerical worker, do you mind doing this clerical work for me?
That's
And he doesn't have to run it up the
applicable.
flagpole
Right.
to see if it happens. It's just,
And Looks to me like we're doing this so we can prevent too many things from being escalated to Andrew or yourself.
Ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that when this is done, there's a manager in place overseeing the employees and satisfying the residents that come in. Because all too often, in the 3 years I've been sitting in this chair, people come in and say, well, I have a question on this, and they say, well, no one is here that can answer that question for you. And that's a problem. So then it comes to me, and I'm in a position where I'm answering things, and that's ultimately, I'm happy to do the best that I can. But at
your
that
best time
process,
spent.
I have to go bother Mr. Jones and Mrs. Jones and call Mr. Smith on the phone to try to find that answer.
Right.
When if we have a person in place who's tasked with that position, not only do we not have to talk to 4 people, the resident can get their response on the spot.
Right.
We've talked about this quite a bit. We don't even have a
Let me
motion
ask
at
you-
this
but
point.
let me ask you this question. If that's the case, what experience do you have, or I have, or anybody on this board, that the engineering services director has? He has no experience in the building department, just like none of us do. We're not talking somebody that has experience in the building department. We're talking somebody that has zero experience, like
But
every
we have
one
a
of us.
building official
So
that
don't
does.
don't anybody dare put off that oh, we have a manager here to answer these questions and that's experienced, because they're not experienced at
Well,
this
what about
point.
the building official? They're experienced, correct?
Correct.
But Ken just said that when the building official's gone, we'll have somebody there to handle but the simple fact is that this person knows no more about that question than any of us here on this board right now.
Which is true. Which is true for you and me. It's true for Mr. Witt, and it's true for our current deputy supervisor. The difference is, I'm sure that you can say that in the 9 or 10 years that you've served on the board and interacted with the building department, you have the ability to answer those questions. You've learned them. When someone
Probably.
comes in and says, well, I don't understand what a drip pan is underneath a hot water heater, how many times have you answered that question? Well, I don't understand what the safety inspection is for. But by the
I've
time
answered that a lot.
Absolutely. But by the time they had to get to you or me or Mr. Witt or Mr. Demchik, it's the result of somebody who should be answering that question not being in place. Does Dave know all the answers to the questions? No. Will Dave know that in the end of 9 months? I'll tell you, he's going to know more answers to those questions than I will, because A, he's working directly with a building official, and B, he's there on a daily basis to address all those issues. He's got to learn more in those 9 months of doing that job 40 hours a week than I have every time somebody comes over to me because nobody's in place.
I would suggest that many of those clerical people probably know the answer to a lot of those
Absolutely.
questions too.
But the problem is, because of our current structure, we're actually paying clerical people to give those answers, and in some cases, it's not fair for them to do so because some of those are decisions that you have to make. They're judgment calls.
We've already had an
Everything
issue
isn't,
with that.
yeah, everything
We're not
isn't black and
talking,
white.
but the point being that at the end of all this, you're making the engineering service director sound like he's the building official and he has all that knowledge.
No.
And he can give out those answers when he's not.
No.
And I get that this is gonna go on, we can just end it right now, we don't even
But
need to
Darren, I don't
discuss
see it that way. I just
Right.
see it as,
And that's fine.
it's management.
You know, you could answer probably 70 to 80% of those questions that come
I
along.
could.
And what I'm saying is if you and I can say that, God knows the guy who's already assigned to that task in the water department has acquired that knowledge, interacts regularly, and has practical building experience as an individual, is every bit as qualified as you and I are as elected officials to sit in that chair. The difference is, at
I
that
don't
point,
get
the
paid
resident.
$95,000 a year for it, that's the difference.
Well, that's
I
another
get paid
matter.
half that.
Right, that's another matter. But we've discussed this at length, and really, you know, I know a lot of boards will say they'll discuss once they have a motion. This isn't worth any more discussion if there isn't any interest in making a motion. Is there a motion this evening?
I still think we need to get that letter of agreement, just protect ourselves.
Mr. Supervisor, would you be in objection to getting a letter of agreement?
Yes, I would.
I think the letter of
It says a lot.
agreement, and I think what Mr. Swikowski had said, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, was the way it was left at the bargaining table was the township management felt that we had ample protections within the contract to undo this 9-month test should we desire to. We felt we had those protections under management rights. And we felt that the union had a great understanding of what our end goal was. But should they feel like they might need some additional protections or some clarification, that they could, should they so desire, bring forth a letter of agreement for us to consider while we make these moves.
Yes.
And to date, we haven't received that, and I'm pretty sure the union is well aware that we're choosing to take these actions tonight,
It was,
or at least considering
that's
them.
where it was left.
Right, and the letter of agreement really had to do with the very act that we would adopt this, agree to this contract and do nothing. Hire this building official at the lower position, not do any of these actions of promotion, or, for example, promote Mr. Extel, but not give him management personnel underneath, which is items 3 and 4. In other words, the letter of agreement from the union's perspective was to say, well, we're going to create these positions, but what if you choose not to fill them and you torpedo the experiment before it even has a chance to come to fruition to see if it could work or not? It wasn't a question of saying what happens when this doesn't work. There wasn't a concern on the part of the union. In fact, the union said, what if, for example, what if the engineering services director doesn't work out in this position? Does he have the right to go back? And we said, as a part of those negotiations, we can't imagine a scenario where we'd have an employee who's dissatisfied in that position, but we insist that they stay in there and suffer. That just doesn't seem to make sense. We're not coming from a position where we had a workflow that was completely broken, but we thought there was a chance to improve the workflow. So we said, if you're fearful that we're not going to follow through, then you can draft a letter of agreement, but we don't have a need to draft a letter of agreement to do what we said we're going to do. That letter of agreement doesn't give us inherently any more rights to lay somebody off. I don't need a letter of agreement to lay off and replace people in former positions. The union, however, could say, well, we hear what you're saying, but you're creating these positions. When we sign this contract, you could do absolutely nothing. And that's a true statement. That letter of agreement assures them that we would take that action. That was the letter of agreement that we discussed. And it's, if that clarifies your question, Mr. Tominello, that's the reason why I don't believe that I have a need for a letter of agreement to say what we'll do if this process doesn't work.
It's called an unfair labor practice, and we lose it every day. I can tell you that right now.
What's called an unfair labor practice?
I mean, if you, just on the basis, we've been around the block a few times on this.
Yeah, but it's a
You
fair
can't-
question. What's-
you
what's
can't tell
unfair?
somebody, you can't tell somebody that, oh, by the way, I'm cutting your position out, and oh, by the way, I'm gonna keep this position over here open, which is a lower paid position, and not expect to lose at arbitration or have an unfair labor practice because your intent is to put them in the lower paying position. That's just basic, we lose those cases every day around here.
Gosh, that's not what I heard. If you tried to jam somebody in a lower paid position
Right.
against their will, yeah, that's
We
a
had
problem.
this discussion, Adam, with
But I don't
with
think that's what
Lucy.
it was said.
Right.
That's my point, Adam. I understand. We talk. I talk with you and Ken, or I talk with Ken. Clearly, Ken and I can talk for an hour in a room, come to an agreement, and we'll walk out and we'll each have a different understanding of what was said. That's all I'm saying. If you have a meeting of the minds, put it down so everybody knows what's going on, and it avoids problems in the future. And I'll just leave it at that. Get a letter of agreement. Don't get a letter of agreement. But at the end of the day, if you get unfair labor practice or whatever, hey, I mentioned it and brought it up, and I can say once again, hey, I told you so.
I'll make a motion to promote Mr. Dave Axtell to the position of Engineering Services Director at the level 1 salary effective April 3rd, 2014.
Support.
Got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Caprell. We've had a fair amount of discussion. If there was further, I'd listen to it, but I'm inclined to open up the floor for public comment if there's no objection.
Bill Sorville resident. I've sat here for 45 minutes. I have things in my head that I don't have enough time to refute if I could remember them. But let's just start chronological order. If I'm not mistaken, the water and sewer superintendent has a license to operate the water plant. Is that correct? Can somebody respond to that?
We don't have a water plant.
Well, to operate our water system.
Yeah, we will reply at the
Okay.
end of public
Well,
comment.
the point being, is there going to be a water and sewer superintendent anymore? All right, not going to answer that. I've had occasion, let me preface this, I agree with Mr. York on everything he said. I've had occasion recently to interact with Mr. Axel. I believe he's well capable. I've praised him for doing good work since he's been in that position. But I believe that he's got his plate full right now. And I can't believe that when you promote him, when something happens in the field that they need his 2 cents, that he's not going to be out in the field. That's his job, his primary job. I'm assuming he's still going to be running water and sewer. All right? That was the same thing with the building official. The building official should be in the building most of the time. If the inspectors can't handle something on their own, then maybe he has to go in the field. The only reason Mr. Prock was in the field was, as Mr. York mentioned, he was trying to be a nice guy and keep the residents happy. He could have just sat in his office and told people, well, you have to wait till next week for the inspection because we don't have any inspectors. And being a builder, I can tell you that happens. I've waited 12 weeks for a permit before because they didn't have enough staffing, they claimed. Told me mine didn't rise to the top of the pile yet. Got in trouble with a resident over that, or a customer. That said, the gentleman that you hired manages right now many, many more people than we employ for the whole township. But yet, you're taking duties away from him, supposedly. At the last meeting, I questioned, why were you paying him over $20,000 less? Mr. Verkest, your response was he had diminished duties. What I'm hearing here is you expect him to do the same duties anyway. So at the very least, if you insist on promoting Mr. Axel over him, I don't really have a problem with that. But change those duties to where everybody that sits on that side of the building is under his immediate control. The idea that there's 4 supervisors is true, but according to union rules, if I'm not mistaken, you answered your immediate supervisor. So Mr. Prock was the immediate supervisor over everybody that works on that side of that building. And that's the way it should be with the new building official. And he should be called building official. If he still wants to work for $62,000 or whatever you hired him for, $61,100, then so be it. But he should have control of it. It's going to be I can't say what it is on public TV here, but it's going to be a mess. And I believe it won't be 9 months. You'll have a grievance from him in a month or two. He'll be in your office after a month saying, this ain't working. I got to have control of these people. And what you're talking about, you gave an example, can't you go to Marge, the deputy treasurer for the people out in TV land, or deputy clerk, my mistake. This is an occasional thing you're talking about. What we're talking about here is multiple times every day. The building official tells these clerical people, I need this, I need that. I can't even see housing. Do you have any intent of getting Housing Board of Appeals working again when we have a building official in place? He needs those people to prepare the paperwork for that. Is he going to have to go to Mr. Axel and ask permission to use these people? It's ludicrous. The whole concept is ludicrous. And finally, it's not revenue neutral. You know, as it was pointed out, it's an enterprise fund. The water and sewer is an enterprise fund. And if you're promoting people in that fund, there's no way it can be cost neutral. The $22,000, first off, is a starting pay. You know, he's not going to stay there. He's going to accelerate too. But for you to say you're going to undo this, I totally agree with Mr. York. You're going to end up with a problem with the union. Now, as far as this letter of agreement, of course the union won't supply one. Everything's in their favor right now. If you don't write a letter of agreement, the union can say, well, it was our understanding that this was going to be a permanent position. You wrote it in the contract. Generally speaking, I've been here a lot of years. Generally speaking, contracts don't diminish stuff. They just add. So, you know, as Mr. Swiatowski pointed out, you did ratify this contract. Here, you approved it. This board did. And the supposition is that after the end of 9 months that you're going to ratify a new contract with the same terms. If you don't, you're going to have a problem. As was said, this gentleman over here is well qualified to do the job he's doing now Why would you go anywhere else for anyone? You'd be silly to even advertise that job. You're just gonna move them from a higher paying job down to a lower paying job because it doesn't work out? You need a letter of agreement. There's lots more, but that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Keith Pratt, resident. I just want to support again Mr. York on his desire for the letter of agreement. It sounds to me like this is kind of a special situation, a 9-month, potentially 9-month-long job, creating a new position, and then you guys don't know right now if this idea is going to work, and if it doesn't work, you may be ending a position. Will there be a grievance? I don't know. That's above my pay grade. But I do know that if there's a grievance, a letter of intent that this may end, and that's very clear, black and white, can neutralize a lot of that before it gets expensive. And I appreciate your desire for stewardship of what's going on in this township, that, you know, maybe we can sidestep a potential problem, because one thing you all agree on is you don't know if this is going to work. And if it doesn't work, you guys need an exit strategy. And I think that letter is a great exit strategy. And again, I appreciate your desire for that.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. I'll do the best I can to answer the residents' questions. The one question was asked, do we need a water and sewer license? We don't per se, but I think a point of clarification, the state of Michigan Department of Environmental Quality requires that based on the size of a municipal water system, depending on how big you are, you need to have a person in place that has a license. So while we as a township aren't necessarily having a license, we're required to employ, I think it's a waterworks operator, but it's an S1, S2, S3, or S4. I think there's now even an S5. But basically, you know, to explain it to residents, if you start out in the water and sewer department, within our contract, we require that you work toward at least getting an S4 license. If you'd like to advance, we'll pay you so many cents per hour more if you get an S3 license, and then an S2, and then the highest license that they offer is an S1. These aren't easy licenses to acquire, but the idea is if you're in the field and you're working, you might see a shortcut or something that's going to make your job easier, but through those courses, you might learn that you really better take this extra step because there's a chance of contamination of the freshwater system. So in the event that in the field, a guy has to make a decision, you'd like as much knowledge departed to them as possible. So an S1 license is a requirement. So it is a requirement for the DEQ for a community of our size to have an S1 license. Our GELC contract requires that the engineering services director would have an S1. The water and sewer superintendent has to have an S1 for that job, and the water and sewer supervisor has to have an S1. So in this case, if we move to a structure where we have an engineering services director and the next item on the agenda is a water and sewer supervisor, we'll have 2 people on staff with S1 licenses. So that might explain the process of the licensing. There was a question made or a comment made about the engineering services director serving out in the field and not being able to separate. Well, I guess if the structure means that he can't be in place, well, then we'll understand that as a part of our experiment. But I also believe that's a function, again, of our management. If we find that regularly we don't have someone in place in the engineering building to oversee the building department and the water and sewer department, then we either need to make a revision to that style of management, or perhaps we need to look at another option, which is the reason why we looked at a sunset. But I think it's important to note that by giving the engineering services director 2 water and sewer field management personnel, it is going to give him that opportunity to spend less time in the field. But I wouldn't suggest that he'd never spend time in the field. Comment was made about taking duties away, $20,000 less in salary. In fact, the position is not $20,000 less, but it also begs the question that our prior building official in 8 years' time acquired a pension and retiree health care. This person will never receive a pension from the township, and they'll never receive retiree health care from the township. But that didn't prevent them from coming and applying for the position and taking the job. regardless of what may have been in place with, for example, our prior engineering services director or a prior water and sewer superintendent. When Dave moved into the superintendent's position, he took it for a salary less than his predecessor. That's his choice. We've advertised a position and a set of responsibilities, and several individuals applied for that job. We had 3 qualified candidates. Through a process, we narrowed them down. All 3 candidates said they'd be willing to take the job for the wages and benefits that we advertised. At that point, I'm content that we offered a fair wage and benefit package. Perhaps the question is, maybe in the past we were offering too much. I can't answer that. But if I've got 3 qualified applicants who apply for the same job and they all say, yes, I'll take the job for the wages and benefits, I'm comfortable that we're offering a fair compensation package. A comment was made that we're likely to get a grievance in 1 to 2 months from our new building official. The new building official isn't even a member of the bargaining unit for about 5 months. So they don't even have that right to grieve. They're an at-will employee for that 5-month probationary period. I believe well before that 5 months, we'll have a good idea of whether this is working and whether that employee is working out. And I'll say I have no reason to believe that this won't work out or that he won't work out. A question was asked about the Housing Board of Appeals. We've had several discussions about the fact that our current structure for handling cases through the Housing Board of Appeals has some deficiencies, and actually Ms. Davis has helped us with that. When we do have a building official in place and hopefully an engineering services director, what I've mentioned to all parties involved is that it would be our intention to sit down together with the attorney to make sure that the board that we have in place to handle those matters is empowered to do the job, but also well within the scope of all the legal aspects so that we minimize any opportunity for litigation. The issue regarding cost neutral, the promotion of these employees are all within their current departments. When we talked about cost neutral, what we looked at was how many employees are we employing in GELC and how much are they paid. And we took that as a pool of salaries and we discussed how we could go through, do that same reallocation of work, because the union came to us and said they'd like a foreman in that position. They felt they were deficient in field management. And we said, well, we don't think we need a foreman. So this is in some ways an outcropping of that negotiation. But when we're done, we're saying that we've spent this much money to employ this many people. And now we're going to spend that much money at level 4, but at level 1 we're going to actually spend less than that for the next 4 years or 3 years to have the same amount of employees. Is there some reallocation of funds from one department to another? Perhaps. But knowing that the engineering services director is a title that can be split between 2 departments, through a budgeting process, we ultimately have that salary that straddles multiple departments to be able to split up and do that equalization so that not only would it be cost neutral, but it should also have a neutral impact to each department. Finally, another resident expressed their support for a letter of agreement, and I want to make sure that everyone understands it isn't that I wished to prevent a letter of agreement. Mr. Tominello asked if I was comfortable with one. I'm comfortable with the tools that we already have in the contract that give us the opportunity to undo this. I'm comfortable with the fact that we've talked about this at length. It isn't that I object to it. I don't believe that it's necessary. I don't believe it's required for us to be able to exercise our rights. The contract has in it several rights. Management has rights and the union has rights, and we operate within that contract. If you don't follow that contract, then you face the prospect of a grievance. But through this process, the reason why we didn't go with a letter of agreement, for example, after 12 months, but we literally went with a contract that would expire after 12 months, is because we're trying to say to 4 or 5 valued employees in a management role, and I'm going to interrupt myself. In many communities, the employees we're referring to here are not unionized. They're at-will employees, and they're managers of people in another department. These employees happen to be unionized. But we're saying to that group of, say, 5 employees that when this is done, we're not going to try to decide today how we're going to unwind this or improve this, and it has to go back to the way it was before, but rather, 9 months from now, if we don't think it worked out, we're not going to say what we're going to do to fix it. We're going to sit back down at the table with you because we've got a long history of working out these problems, and maybe the solution that we need 8, 9 months from now is neither what we have nor what we'd like it to be. But if we can't come to an agreement, A, the contract runs out, and B, the contract already has provisions in it that allow us to lay people off. So we always maintain that right. And it's for that reason that I'm saying that I'm not desirous of that letter of agreement.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just, or maybe a little clarification. Article 6 of the collective bargaining agreement, which specifies management rights. That's not that long, and I'm going to read it. Except as specifically and expressly limited by this agreement, the employer shall have the customary and regular functions of management and the right to manage and direct the township operations and its employees, including the right to hire, promote, assign, transfer, suspend, discipline, discharge, layoff, and recall personnel, to publish and enforce work rules that are not arbitrary or capricious, and to establish penalties for violation of such rules, to determine reasonable workloads, to schedule overtime on a reasonable basis, to establish and change work schedules, to provide and assign relief personnel, to establish, modify, or eliminate job functions, to inaugurate new and expanded programs, and to exercise all other rights and authority heretofore vested in the employer. Exercise of the foregoing management rights shall in no case be arbitrary, capricious, or discriminatory, or inconsistent or in conflict with the express provisions of this agreement. So this is what, it's based on all our actions are. Now, in the past, if nobody had the guts or the chutzpah to enforce that, that's not my problem. And we can talk about what happened in the past for years. But if nobody's going to say, this is our management rights, we're doing this, then it's useless, like anything. So if we have it here, I think it's expressing, and plus, when the contract expires, the first thing we do is suspend the contract. We send a letter to suspend the contract, so the only thing that they still get is their pay and benefits, but every other thing is gone. We can do that under the law. So those gives it, that, under para, that gives us the right to do that, so.
But on top of all of that, this is a bargaining unit with which we've managed to, this was the first bargaining unit to take, and that's dangerous, but certainly several of the,
We enjoy a very good relationship, a working relationship with.
well, yeah, but truly, several of the, what's the word I'm looking for, the cuts, when the employees have accepted various concessions, thank you, that's the word. This was the first bargaining unit to accept that. This was the first and only bargaining unit to ever agree to provide a part of their pay to pay for their health care. This was the first bargaining unit to end the pension for new employees. This is a bargaining unit with which I can't think of any significant grievance that I'm even aware of ever. So we're having a great deal of discussion about this contentious problem that might occur when in fact both sides have discussed this and put in a lot of things in place. And it was a part of that negotiating process that we said, well, we don't need a letter of agreement to say what we're going to do when this ends. We're completely content to sit down with a group of respected employees and talk about how to handle this moving forward if in fact this experiment doesn't work. And I feel confident that we have several mechanisms in place, including the right to lay off and recall, the right to advertise and hire, and the fact that the very contract itself is expiring, which is an agreed upon concept between both union and management for a method to end this if it becomes a problem. And frankly, I don't know that anybody's going into this anticipating it's a problem on top of that.
The point being, very simply, and from our discussion tonight, I don't think this has been point A, point B, point C, like management people do. You sit down, you do the workflow, you sit down with all the people involved, including the new building official, and look at it. And all I'm saying, that's what management does. You sit down and you look at your staff and you look at what's going on and the workflow issues, and you talk to people that are in that situation if you're not familiar with it. And I'm about 80% familiar with what the building department does, but I don't know the intricacies. I mean, of the every day-to-day operation. And my point being, no one's really done that. And it wasn't
Well,
done.
actually, we
it-
did
well,
several
well,
times in
well,
negotiations.
Well, not really.
Yeah, really.
I brought up several items tonight that we don't know the answer to. And those are actual, jobs that we're doing. But that being said, go ahead and let's vote 6-1 and let's move on. But I think that our attorney did say to at least have Mr. Ruth look at that letter of understanding to protect us in the future. And I know this board, because you always say to me, we always listen to the attorney.
Thank you. And I'm not familiar with your language, it's here for Mr. Huth, but I do want to reiterate, it doesn't hurt to have Mr. Huth look at it, and to just my concern reading the 3 successions is that you're taking somebody from one bargaining unit into another one. And I think that caused me to say, hey, wait a minute, that should be something to definitely look at, because that could be considered an unfair labor practice, moving people from one union into another.
Right.
So if, it might be wise to put in a motion to have Mr. Huth review that, if that's
Yep.
possible to do.
Yep. And I heard that clearly when you said that you had a greater concern about moving someone from one bargaining unit to another. And a couple of things, we're not making a motion or taking any action on that tonight. So at such time when we bring back a proposal to move someone, potentially, and it's not 100%, and that's important for us to say, well, we've discussed several things, that's definitely an option. Because the 4th item on this package of things is to post internally for that position, and the candidates are likely in another bargaining unit. If that turns out to be the action that we want to take, I think that would be the time to have a letter agreement for that individual, because you're talking about someone between 2 bargaining units, and you certainly don't, in other words, I can't negotiate those rights at this table with this bargaining unit, I can't negotiate rights with AFSCME. So I heard clearly when you said what brought a concern for you was when you move someone from one bargaining unit to another, both bargaining units might want a clear understanding of what happens if that fails. And I think that's a very, very valid point, and it's not something that's contained in this contract. And for that reason, I believe that at some point, if someone internally does apply for this, and we do bring that person back before the board, it would be then that we'd want to have a letter of agreement in place with both bargaining units as to what we intend to do. And I see that, and I heard from you that your concern of moving between 2 bargaining units is what kind of raised your concerns.
The reason that
Because
I
I
brought
can't
the-
speak to what this contract says, because I have not read it.
Sure, understood.
The reason I bring that up is, and sometimes it's hard to follow the argument, but I heard it from Mr. Brado, I heard it from you several times, I heard it from Mr. Swikowski, that this is a package. I'm only discussing this once as a package. I won't be discussing B, C, and D. All right, several times tonight we've talked about this is a package. And if it is a package, like everybody says, that was negotiated on, have the whole package done. Don't say, we're gonna promote this person and that person, and then we're splintering this off now as a letter of agreement. That's my point. We keep saying it's a package, but then, oh, well, we'll splinter this off and splinter that off.
I'm not splintering anything. I've proposed
You are.
3 actions here.
You
And
are.
each one has to be addressed separately in the form of a motion. I can't, there's no way I can craft a motion to say that all this is gonna occur. And D, as you refer to it, or D4,
Whatever it is, I
number
don't know
4,
what it is,
is merely to approval to post an interview internally for the position of water and sewer foreman. If and when the 3 full-timers come back with a recommendation, that's when we might have to take a look at a letter of
Can you
agreement.
set negotiations and set a name and set a name and set a name?
I
and
didn't
set
say a name. The union brought forward
And
a
set
name.
a name. We all know the name.
I think we have a motion, we
do.
have support, and I think the 7 of us have enough information to make a decision.
Call for the
I-
question.
Well, we don't have to call for a question. Does anybody have an objection to voting? Is a roll call vote requested?
Yes.
All right. We've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Capral to promote Mr. David Extel, the position of Engineering Services Director with a level 1 salary of $82,170 plus current benefits effective April 3rd of 2014. Mr. Witt, will you please take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Capral?
Yes.
Mr. Brado?
Yes.
Mr. Swikowski?
Yes.
Mr. Tominello?
Yes,
Mr. York?
No.
Mr. Verkest?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Board. Next on our agenda is item D3. Board members, at our last regular board meeting, March 10th, we approved the 2014 GELC supervisory contract. One part of the new contract was to draft new language to allow promotion from the AFSCME bargaining unit into the GELC bargaining unit. Justin Murphy has been our acting water and sewer foreman for over 2 years. During that time, he has demonstrated that he is well suited for the position. I believe Mr. Murphy is an excellent candidate for the position of water and sewer supervisor. He has had what amounts to a 2-year probationary period during which he has proven his ability without exception. And as a result, I'm proposing a motion to promote Mr. Murphy to the position of water and sewer supervisor with the same effective date of 4/3/14 at a level 1 rate of $72,540 plus his benefit package.
Just a question, because he hasn't been technically in the union in the position, but he has been functioning under that role for 2 years, basically as a 2-year probation.
Right.
I mean, we have a probation period in the contract for people we hire. Are we maintaining that?
Yeah, he's entering GELC
Yeah,
at this point. He's.
Okay, I just
yeah.
wanted to make sure I was
Yeah, I
clear
can't,
on.
yep, there is no
that.
process by which I can waive, but the
Right.
language in the contract does differentiate between internal candidates. It has some differentiation.
Okay.
Between internal candidates and candidates that are outside.
I
So
just,
the-
I mean, the guy's been in there for 2 years. I don't want to be undually unfair, but
Right,
if
right.
we don't ask it.
Yeah,
There's
but
also
the
been-
flip side of that is the fact that he's been doing it for over 2 years
Yeah.
leads us to believe that the
We'll
probationary
win every
period is
problem,
an issue, right?
Well, I think that, it's funny, we had a thing 2 years ago to bring him in as the water sewer foreman, and now all of a sudden we're bringing him in as the water sewer maintenance supervisor. It's quite odd, but while I do not have a problem with hiring Mr. Murphy in either the foreman position or maybe even that maintenance supervisor position, I can't support the motion unless we have a letter of agreement on the full package of items.
Okay. Well, we don't even have a motion, so you
Well, no, I
can't
want
support
Justin to
him.
know that,
I understand, but you're
don't-
talking about a motion, there isn't even a motion on the floor, so we might want to have one before we go
I
through.
think I can comment, Mr. Verkes, just like you can
I understand,
comment.
you said you can't
And I'm
support the
making my
motion.
I'm making my comment,
I'm sorry.
and then someone will make a motion, and then I'm not gonna say anything more.
All right.
So I'm just making a comment to let Mr. Murphy know that I think he's qualified for the job. I'd have no problem voting for him for the job. But because I have this feeling that we could get stung and we're not protecting the township and its residents, I gotta vote no on this.
Rosemary, can we draft, I'm not suggesting this, but are we legally allowed to draft a letter of agreement for a package of 3 people when these are all being presented as 3 separate items? Isn't it kind of
Yeah,
blurring?
I think we could
Yeah.
agree to anything with the union
Right.
if we chose to, and
Right.
both
But
parties
it
agree.
appears to me there's more than one union that you'd have to have a memorandum of agreement for.
Right, so that's my point.
For each one, you'd have to have a.
Right, we can't do a package. We
No.
have to do each one
each one
individually.
attached to
Okay,
a particular.
that's what I wanted to clarify.
Well, I think each union separately, so the water,
Right.
the 3 and then the one from AFSCME.
So it would have to be 3 separate letters of agreement.
Two, right?
2 bargaining units, right?
Yes.
2 letters of agreement,
Two.
okay. All right.
All right, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to promote Justin Murphy to the position of water and sewer supervisor. That's level 1.
Level 1.
Level 1, effective April 3rd, 2014.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt, is there support?
Support.
Got support by Mr. Caprell. We've had some discussion, is there further discussion, board? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by.
Roll call, please.
Okay, roll call vote?
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Caprell?
Yes.
Mr. Brado?
Yes.
Mr. Swikowski?
Yes.
Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. York?
No.
Mr. Verkest?
Yes. Thank you, board. Item D4 on our agenda. Board members, at the March 10th regular board meeting just 2 weeks ago, we approved the 2014 GELC supervisory contract. One part of the new contract was to create a new management structure and to draft new language to allow promotion from the AFSCME bargaining unit to the GELC bargaining unit. Another part of the contract in negotiations was its short duration, through the end of this year, roughly 9 months. This was agreed upon in order to give a sunset provision to the management structure change. The duties of the engineering services director center around less field supervision and more office responsibilities. As a result, the salary structure was modified to allow for 2 water and sewer field supervisors. I recommend posting the position of water and sewer foreman internally first to see if any current AFSCME water and sewer employees have an interest first. So the proposed motion would be to post and interview internally for the position of water and sewer foreman, with a possible recommendation to come back before the Board of Trustees. This hopefully is the easiest of all motions, because all we're proposing to do at this point is to find out if there is interest in any of our current 8 field personnel to pursue promotion into this foreman position.
Mr. Supervisor, I'll make that motion.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello. Is there support? Mr. Brado?
Support.
All right, thank you.
It might make sense to add in there that should there be no internal candidate, that we would then have the authority to then advertise outside in case, I mean, if there's a process that we're going through.
Sure. My concern with that is if there is no internal candidate, then it's gonna be difficult to fill, because I don't know that I'm prepared to lay somebody off from AFSCME. So I don't wanna take action that says that we would look outside at this point.
We're good.
Right? Does that make sense? You understand?
Yep.
Okay. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, are you requesting a roll call, Mr. York?
Yes, I don't think we need this position at all.
Okay.
Mr. Tominello,
Yes.
Mr. Brado,
Yes.
Mr. Capral,
Yes.
Mr. Swikowski,
Yes.
Mr. York,
No.
Mr. Witt, yes, Mr. Verkest.
Yes. Motion carries. All right, well, that concludes the business items that we have. So now we'll open up the floor for public comment. I see that we have some newer residents, or maybe not new residents, but new to the board meeting. So during public comment, you can discuss anything that you'd like. We generally try not to engage in discussion back and forth with the residents. It's just a time where we open the floor, and there's a 5-minute limit to that discussion. If you've got a thought when the buzzer goes off, try to wrap that up, but generally we limit those issues to 5 minutes.
Keith Pratt, resident. This may require a little discussion, or this may be the wrong place, but my mother, you see, is older. She's not wheelchair bound, but she does need that walker a lot of places she goes, because she can only walk a short distance before she's got to rest. She uses the, I don't know what you call it, the Smart Connect service to go to physical therapy and things like that. And she can't use it because she's not in a wheelchair. They won't let her use the wheelchair lift, but the steps are so high in the vans that she has a very hard time pulling herself up on the rails to get into the bus on the stairs. So the wheelchair lift broke one time. They were using it to lift her up in that. And when it broke, the question came to the driver, what were you using the wheelchair lift for? You didn't have a wheelchair scheduled. And the driver explained, Mom using the walker, and they said, well, she can't do that because she's not in a wheelchair. So that left her without the ability to use the bus. So I'd like for you guys to fix that, or tell me who I have to talk to fix that.
Sure. Yep, that's a fair request. What I'll propose is perhaps after, I think we're close to the end of the meeting. After the meeting, we can make sure we get all your contact information and investigate that. I'll say it seems like a reasonable request to me, but even after 3 years of sitting here, every week you get a new request, and you know, there's probably a rule somewhere to explain that, but usually there's a solution to those problems, so we'll try to take care of that.
I'll chime in here. DOT regulations won't allow you to use the chairlift for a person, because in your insurance company won't let you do it because simply of liability.
Does that include sitting on the, because what she does, she rolls that on there, sits down on it.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know.
That's what I tried to explain.
The DOT regulations have a whole section of rules on wheelchair lifts and how you work them, how you're supposed to use them.
Sure.
And I
Right.
think that's where you'll
And
find
that's
it.
outside of the regulations.
Well, and I think
And I
the
can
point
tell you
is,
from having a license, I've gone through that training, and you're not allowed to have somebody on that, on a walker.
Sure.
To lift them up. It's
Well, perhaps
dangerous.
we could buy a wheelchair, have it on the bus, have them put
Now,
her in
you
the
could do
wheelchair
that.
and
Right.
put her on the ramp.
I like that
what I
idea.
was trying to say was,
Absolutely.
I can't imagine that in the interest of trying to accommodate folks with various disabilities or limitations, that the rules are structured to say there's a no. There's usually some sort of workaround, but because we don't run into it all the time, I don't know that answer. But that's why I say, when we're done, we'll make sure we get the contact information. I know that our representatives at SMART are as helpful as possible. I'm sure this is a problem they've encountered before, and they've got a solution to it, and I can't believe the answer is just a flat no.
Great.
Mr. York is correct, and Mr. Brado is actually correct in bringing that up. When I worked for a school system, that's exactly what they did. They kept a wheelchair on the bus. The person actually just sits in the bus because the wheelchair can lock in place, designed the way the ramp was designed. And so then they lift them up, turn them, then they can step on to the bus, to their walker, which is placed up before them, and they go to their seat, all set.
I feel bad that he waited the whole meeting.
Yeah.
You could have just called.
Well, hey, yeah, it wouldn't have been as interesting as sitting home. What the heck?
They get to see democracy in action right here, right?
You couldn't see the big debate, right?
All
I
right.
always lose.
Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. I can certainly say during our board comment, you may recall that we sat here, oh gosh, a couple months ago, applying for a SAW grant that would address sanitary asset management of our sanitary sewers, stormwater, and I think it was a total $1.6 million project between the grant monies and our match. We received a letter Friday or today from the Department of Environmental Quality. We had already known that we were qualified, that our grant application met that requirement, and we received a letter saying that we have been selected in the lottery out of what we thought could be a 5-year period for about $1.37 million in grant dollars. And you might recall, those dollars pay for 90% of the engineering cost to redesign the storm pump station. That was at Beechwood, basically crossing Metro Parkway. Pays for 90% of the design engineering costs for the Bay Haven sanitary sewer pump station, as well as the river crossing. And then the balance of that was to do an analysis, or basically an assessment, of our entire sanitary sewer system, including cameras, and the process of using those cameras helps us to identify infiltration, weak points, so that we can then form a plan to go through our entire sanitary sewer system, and where we might think that the sanitary sewers in this particular neighborhood are most in need. The actual process of measuring and videoing the inside of these can tell us that, in fact, maybe we have infiltration in another community, and the money that we save can actually pay for the project in a short period of time, because we're not allowing an infiltration of groundwater into our sewers and paying to have it processed. So
That's awesome.
$1.37 million, so that's good news. So thanks for the help from Wade Trim in acquiring that grant. Is there any other board comments?
Motion to adjourn?
I would
Oh,
like to
sorry.
say, I would like to say, I appreciate the patience that the residents showed in bringing forward their issue under public comments. I want to make sure that those residents know, as well as any resident of the township, if they have those questions, you can call the supervisor's office anytime. You know, that's what we do on a daily basis, a lot of times, solving problems or, you know, working solutions to problems. So you don't have to come to a meeting, but we're certainly not discouraging you.
Also have a workshop
So,
at the beginning of the meeting.
yeah, and we also have an open forum, thanks the resident mentioned, from 6:30 to 7. You can also, if you'd rather not bring that issue to the board via email or phone, you can come to the meeting, and during that time, we're available to have any open discussion in the board forum. Mr. York, did you have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
All right, is there support?
Support.
All right, we got a motion that's been made and supported to adjourn at about 9:30. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board.